Happy Tuesday, everybody. So thankful you've joined me for today's devotion. We are in the book of Psalms. Today, Psalm 56. And I'm going to do two things. Talk about what the psalm actually is saying. And then at the end, part of it that really spoke to me and apply it to our context. The theme I wrote at the top of my journal after reading this psalm and praying through it was, don't act like the world. Let's be different. As God's people, let's be different. This psalm is traditionally assigned to David during the time, we don't know which time, but a time when he was seized by the Philistines. And whether it's David or someone else who actually wrote this psalm, what's obvious is that the author is definitely being oppressed by others. He makes that clear in the first two verses of Psalm 56 and in verses 5 and 6. So just like Friday's psalm, he's being oppressed by others. And his response, just like Friday's psalm in verses 3 and 4 and verse 11, is to turn to God. So in the midst of people being against him, people hurting him, having problems, he chooses to turn to God. And he asks a question, and he asks the same question twice in this psalm. Look with me at verse 4. Verse 4. At the very end of the verse, after turning to God, he says, what can mere man do to me? What can mere mortals do to me? And he asks the same thing if you'll look at the end of verse 11. Again, after saying, I will put my trust in God and not be afraid, he says, what can man do to me? So here he is, he's being opposed by others, they're hurting him. He turns to God, says, I'm not going to be afraid, I'm going to trust God. And then twice, each time after turning to God, he says, it's almost as though he's saying, man can't do anything to me. What can man do to me? And so I started thinking about that. What can people do to us? Well, the truth is they can do a lot. They can belittle us, they can ridicule us, they can make fun of us, they can attack our reputation and character, they can create problems for us, they can insult us. What can people do? What can man do? They can abuse us physically, verbally, emotionally. They can persecute us. They can even kill us, martyr us for the faith. So people can do a lot. They can steal from us. So it doesn't mean they can't do anything. They can actually do a lot to hurt us. And yet, you remember Jesus in Matthew chapter 10, verse 28 said something that I think helps us understand this psalm. In Matthew 10, 28, Jesus said, do not fear those who can kill the body, but are unable to kill the soul. Rather, fear him, fear God, who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Yes, people can do a lot, but God can do more. And so the psalmist says, in the midst of all this turmoil and personal attacks, he's not going to be afraid. Instead, he's going to turn to God, because his trust in God is greater than his fear of others, because he knows they can never do to him what God can. And he's going to trust God more. Good advice for all of us. And yet I said my takeaway was for us not to act like the world, but be different. Now, where do I get that from? It's from his description of one of the ways people were attacking him. Something people were doing to make life hard for him. Look at verses 5 and 6. He says, all day long they distort or twist my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. Verse 6. They attack, they lurk, they watch my steps as they have waited to take my life. It's as though they are looking for an opportunity to get me. And they distort, they twist what I say, and their thoughts, their attitude, their thinking is always against me as they plot how to twist my words, as they plot how to catch me in a trap, as they plot how to get me. And I thought about those verses and that attitude and said, that's about as good a description of modern America as there is. You think about our modern culture, a gotcha culture, twisting, distorting what people say. Half-truths are very popular in America today. Taking something someone says out of context, not taking the whole thing they said, but just a little phrase and twisting it for our purposes to make them look bad. That's the American way today. That's what happens on social media platforms. It's what happens on cable news every night. It's what politicians do. And unfortunately, it's what too many people who say they follow Jesus do when they talk about people they don't agree with. Distorting their words. Half-truth, innuendo, taking things out of context, not explaining the nuances of what someone really says or believes or meant. But we find a word, we find a phrase, and I can lift that out and twist it just a little bit and gotcha. That's what they were doing to the author of this psalm. That's the common way of communicating in our culture today. Christians, please don't act like that. Because the truth is, that's being dishonest. When you distort or twist what someone says or means, when you take it out of context, when you don't tell the whole nuanced thing or what they're really trying to say, you're being dishonest. And being dishonest is breaking one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not bear false witness. You shall not lie. It's unethical. It's sinful. And I think in today's culture, it's more important perhaps than ever for us to be fully informed, not partially informed. And what too many of us do is we get into these silos and we only listen to and we only read people who agree with us. And whatever the people who agree with us say about an opponent, we take it at face value, and that is a mistake. I intentionally read so I can fully or better understand people on the right and on the left and in between. In my news feed, I read CNN as much as I read Fox. Because if I only read CNN, I'm not getting the full picture. And if I only read Fox, I'm not getting the full picture, and neither are you. Don't distort and twist. God's people are better than that. And that's the prophetic word for today. I'll see you tomorrow.